I think the parents rather hoped that I might get into university. And I wasn't passing the exams, the necessary exams, but at the same time I was developing quite a bit of interest in what my father was doing, what he stood for. Not intellectually, I was too young to do it intellectually, but from an instinctive point of view, I felt that he was really doing something quite unique, wasn't being done by anybody else, and that it was really of lasting importance, and that maybe I should try and ally myself with it. So I approached my father in my last year at school and said, what do you think about my coming along and being kind of apprentice? And he was a bit surprised because I hadn't shown a great deal of interest earlier on, expressed interest. But he was delighted. And I started there and then in 1930, in the summer of 1930, and never looked back. I've never done anything else.
David Leach and two of his sons now run a successful pottery near Bovey Tracy on the edge of Dartmoor. Though he was deeply upset by the breakup of his father's first marriage, David was Bernard's right hand for a quarter of a century, going to the potteries to learn fresh techniques and acting both as manager and salesman. It was David who suggested taking pottery to the big London stores when their export drive had emptied their shelves of the more traditional goods. Eight members of the Leach family now carry on the pottery tradition. They've all adopted their own styles, but it was Bernard who provided their inspiration and their integrity.
Well, yes, I think he's an artist all through his life, but actually, in fact, he didn't do much more than sketching, I think. You see, he'd wanted to be an artist, always, from childhood. At school, I think he wasn't any good at anything but drawing, elocution, and cricket. Those were his great things that he really enjoyed. And then, when he left school, he was allowed to go on to the slate, and he was taught to draw. And I think that knowledge of how to draw was frightfully was as important as his potting and as great as his potting. He went out, you see, to Japan with no idea of potting. He was going to teach them etching, which was another thing that he specialized in, and that was his idea, to teach the Japanese how to etch. I think this was a new media for them, but in no time at all, he was the student, because he got involved with this pottery and he suddenly realized that's what he wanted to do. But I think his drawing was so economical. He drew with such enthusiasm, anything that excited him. He drew very rapidly. He never would use two lines where one would do. And when it came to pottery, this quick, impressionist, how can I say, he'd get the epitome of something and put it where it fitted exactly onto a pot. And I think that some of his best pots are the ones that have the brushwork on them, or the tiles. These are the ones that I like best.
Some pots are enhanced by decoration, others not. The application of pattern should be strictly determined by the need of the shape for further orchestration. You see, it is very much like a problem in musical composition. But no matter what one says about the complex relationships of shape, pattern, and color textures, ultimately it is the manner in which such abstract ideas are applied which will determine the vitality of the work.
Bernard Leach was a man without an enemy and a great raconteur. He would tell of his escapades in a motorcycle and sidecar as he toured the country with his family, and how during the war he walked into a police station with a shotgun on his shoulder and a request to join the Home Guard. His relaxation of writing poetry was natural enough to those who live at St. Ives.
My room so warm, my window large, at the sea edge. The dried foam blows along the sand, rolls into nothingness. Waves burst upon the rocks, which stream like waterfalls. Seabirds balance in the wind, then streak across the window pane. The seventh wave comes rolling in right to the wall below. At Clodgy Point, under the northwest wind, Atlantic rollers burst full 40 foot.
The youngest of the Leach dynasty is grandson Johnny, who works in Somerset. Johnny's an English village potter through and through, though his work is on sale at the Victoria and Albert Museum.
I distinctly remember him being a lot tougher with me because he was my grandfather, and I suppose he felt I could take it, or he could deal with my objections if I had any. And I found that very useful. I remember particularly being in this rather strange position of being Bernard Leach's grandson at his pottery. And I was about 19 at the time, and I felt that I had to impress. And after a few firings and a few of my pots that were criticized pretty strongly by my grandfather, I realized that I've just got to be myself and not pretend. I was trying to con myself into thinking this shape and that shape and so on were good designs, and of course I was slapped right down. That was good for me. It really was. I think I get a lot of inspiration and ideas, and I think his criticism at those times, you know, those early years for me were very important. I'm influenced by him. I'm proud to be influenced by him because I believe a lot of what he says, you know, in his writings and what he's made. I mean, he's been here, he's looked at my stuff, and he commented reasonably favorably, which is fantastic for him.
Johnny, like his grandfather, still thrills to the magic of a wood-fired kiln. He remains close to his family, but what link can be found between the robust work of Johnny and the more delicate style of his father David?
Very different. I think neither of them are the artists that Bernard, neither of them are. They're approaching the pottery from a very different end. I mean, Johnny, for argument's sake, the grandson, is not involved in making art. He's involved in making very useful, simple, cheap ware, which people like to use and get great pleasure from. And that's his aim in life. It's quite different. Bernard wanted to make a statement in art creative terms. I don't think Johnny does, actually, not in the same extrovert way.
Bernard Leach ranks without question among the great potters of the world. The stamps on the bottom are no more than a guide to the collector. So what was this extra ingredient that Leach introduced?
Well, it's not his throwing. That's something that's not important in a funny sort of way. He wasn't a virtuoso thrower, but it's just the bringing together of, I think, love in the making process. It's a horrid word these days, but I think it's terribly important. And the generosity in the throwing. I mean, it is generous. It's got a rich glaze. It's got a body which is sympathetic to it. It's sympathy. I don't know how you would describe it. It just feels to me to be a statement about a man living, making things in a very right way. I think it's the rightness of the making, and the form itself not exceptional, but right.
Well, I think he was the granddaddy or the great-granddaddy of us all. I mean, there were craft movements before then, but I think it really got off the ground with Bernard and his book and his lectures and his work, of course.
Integrity is one word. Integrity in the making. And that, in its turn, relates back to materials and certainly, I think, showed the way towards using the materials that we have in the ground, the flame kiln, all these things which people, I think,